I can. Yay.
Look at us.
I know, right? There we are.
You
Back at
inspired
it.
us already, Elaine.
Right. Yeah.
For sure.
Well, welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm Elaine, as if we don't know each other, right? And you probably also know that I'm originally from Minnesota, from a tiny town there that was an Icelandic and Norwegian and German settlement. It was a town of about 900 people. And there was a Norwegian Lutheran church and an Icelandic Lutheran church, and then a Catholic church for the Germans. And the reason that they had both of those was that at the time, in the late 19th century, people spoke those languages. So they had to have two separate churches. And the first thing that I learned in Icelandic was fara heim til Ísland, go home to Iceland. It was a very ingrained culture in me. People spoke it around me, and etc. So Iceland is in my history. And I think this was a part of the way in which Lisa talked about this, but not everyone is linear, and you'll see that I certainly have not been. I've lived in 9 states, but this is it. I'm not leaving. So and this is in order of what I have done. I was a student. I never went to kindergarten. They didn't have kindergarten then. That way back when. A gift wrapper, a telephone solicitor, a chicken cook, a terrible student in college. I was a good student in high school, but not in college. A waitress, a secretary, a marketing coordinator, marketing consultant. And this was all without a degree. I only went 2 years when I was a terrible student. A marketing consultant. And then I moved to Wyoming, and I was the chamber marketing director in Gillette. And then I owned a trophy shop in Gillette. Then I met Richard and I went back to school and I became a student again. And then that was when I found clay, became a potter and sculptor, a university professor, and then an editor and publisher, and a writer, editor, and proofreader is what I am doing a lot of right now. And I'm always a student. This is my grandmother on the left. She graduated with a 4-year degree in 1906. That was her graduation picture. And this was my mother in the middle. She graduated with her 4-year teaching degree in 1933. And she was about 26 at that point. My grandmother was traditional age. And I finished, that's me on the right, I finished my Bachelor of Fine Arts at the age of 46. So it was a late, pardon? Ask questions along the way if you want. Is somebody going to ask something? So this is my mother and father. My mother, back then, well, until World War II, you couldn't teach and be married. So once she got married, she didn't teach anymore. My dad was a building contractor, and he built these small homes in Minnesota, my hometown. But I want to go back here. How do I go back? My mother died when I wasn't 4. And so at that point, I've been told that she died of cancer. And I don't want this to go on too long, but I just want to tell you that she left 5 scrapbooks that start when she was 12, and they end about 6 months before she died at age 41. She was 41 when she died. They had children later. And these scrapbooks are continuous. They, when one was full, she went to the next one. So there are 5 scrapbooks that have taught me more about my mother than I had learned in all the years I've been alive. Most of what I knew about her, I do have some memories, but most of what I learned about her, I learned from relatives who knew her well. So it was just a treasure to get these scrapbooks. And none of my kids are interested in the scrapbooks. So they are going to the American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming. And they will make them digitally searchable and archival, which is really a gift. So I was told that when my mother died and my dad about a year later was remarrying, my mother's brother came to the door and said, "You will not move another woman into this house." So they picked up and we all moved to South Dakota, to Rapid City, where I went to first grade. And my father being in the construction business, there wasn't that much work there. So then we moved to California a year later. And that's me. I made myself bigger because my brothers were always stronger. So I pasted myself in here bigger. So my stepmother had two sons who were the same ages as my brother and I. And my brother is the real smiley one on the left. And then the other two are my stepbrothers. And then when I was 11 and my brother was just 13, our father died. And he died really suddenly of a coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in his heart. And so because they had cross-adopted each other's children, we ended up staying with my stepmother. And we lived in Southern California. And then I went away to college. I had a little bit of money from my mother's insurance, but not very much. And I went the day that I was headed off to college. My stepmother said, "Find somewhere else to spend your vacations," which was just the worst thing to hear. I know. It's just, we all know how insecure we are at that age anyway. It ultimately later made me a better professor because I could really relate to the insecurities in my students, even those who had parents to go home to. So, they would close the dorms at the holidays, and we just ended up going home with friends. And then we would get an apartment together in the summer. And the first summer we were there, my cousin said, "Okay, next year you come out and spend a month with me and my husband in Chicago." So they had no children and she was 20 years older than I. So the next summer, which would have been 1965, I moved to Chicago. I got a one-way ticket and she said, "Well, we'll figure out when you go home." And they invited me to stay and live with them. So I lived with them for about 2 years, and that kind of got my feet back on the ground. And then, did you see that little red thing pop back over there to Ohio? I moved again. I met my met my first husband, and he worked for Goodyear. He had a degree in chemistry, and he was in sales for plastics, which always makes me think of the movie The Graduate. Plastics is the word, And so we lived there for a while, and we had these two little gremlins. The little bald one, I always say that. She knows I say it too, though. That's Cheryl. And she worked for me when I had the magazines in Sheridan. She lives in Sheridan. And she now manages Killy's Pub. She has a degree in psychology. And I always say that she only used it on me, but she's the sweetest thing. The other day I stopped in to say goodbye to her and I had a glass of water. I said, "I want a drink." So she said, "What do you want?" I said, "Water with lemon." And she said, "That's not a drink." Anyway, but she was telling somebody else who was sitting there, she said, whenever anybody, she said, "I got my mom for my first birthday, the day I was born." And she said, "Whenever people ask me what I want for my birthday," she said, "I already got the best present I could ever have, my mom." So she's just that kind of a young woman. She's really loving. And the one with her is now an orthopedic surgeon in Michigan, and she controls the world, which is really funny. But and she just at the age of 48 had twins. Most of you know this. She's 51 now, and they are 3.5. And I'll be 90 when they're 18. So, but I'm back and forth to Michigan about 3 or 4 times a year, which is such a treat. And then my first husband, who is Jim Henry, I still have his last name, was transferred to Niagara Falls, New York. So we lived on Grand Island, which is an island in the middle of the Niagara River, for about 10 years. It's a great community there. And then we divorced and I moved back to Minnesota with the girls. Did you see me move? How quick that happens. Oops, wait a minute. So I lived in Wyoming, or in Minnesota, for just a year. And then I moved to Wyoming and lived in Gillette. Okay. Oops, I'm going backwards. I'm moving back. So I lived in Gillette, and that's where I had worked for the chamber, and then for the trophy, had a trophy shop. There I am in about 1983 or 4. I actually climbed Cloud Peak.
I love that picture of you, Elaine. I
Do
didn't realize
you?
you. Yes. Because you were such an outdoorsy girl, and I love the bear.
The beer, I know.
Bear in the boat.
Coors always gives me a headache, so I never drink Coors. I don't know why I had it, but anyway,
But
that was
love that.
actually, this was down in Outlaw Canyon by Buffalo, south of Buffalo.
Oh,
We
yeah.
climbed down, yeah.
Natural beauty.
And then, oh, bless your heart.
Mm.
And then I met Richard, and because I had artwork out there and things, he was willing to keep his maiden name. And he had owned the John Deere dealership here, and we were both absolutely broke. And he said, "You want to get your degree? Let's just go do it." So we moved down to Laramie, and we had 1 month's rent paid. It was January of '89. And my younger daughter, Cheryl, had started her first semester there. Her older sister was off to school in Ohio. And I called her and said, "Do you mind if I come too?" And there was this big long pause on the phone. And she says, "As long as we don't have any classes together and I don't run into you at a fraternity party." And I said, "It's a deal. I can do that." So we ended up having algebra together, and I thought, well, there was not another section that fit my schedule. I thought, if she doesn't like it, she can switch. So the first day I walked in, and I kind of gave her a little wave and started to sit down, and she goes, "Mom," and she'd saved me a place to sit. So so it worked. I got a better grade than she did, but it was pretty funny. So I started as an art student there, and I had already taken some art classes when we were living in Western New York, and Buffalo was right there. So I'd taken my foundations and things, but as soon as I took a clay class, I just fell in love with the material because it was so visceral. And I loved the mark of the tool on it. This is a piece that I did of a meat grinder. And yeah, I really wish, it was so fragile, but I really wish I still had that piece. And Cesar Baldacchini, this isn't clay, but his use of material and his exploiting the material was something that it gave me what my art philosophy professor used to call aesthetic ecstasy, when you feel it, in your gut. So I was working pretty representationally, and this was my senior year. I did this as a self-portrait. So you see the pumpkin down here. I felt like I grew up with the Cinderella syndrome. era, when you marry and live happily ever after, and nobody tells you what happens after happily ever after. And this big shoe here is my baby shoe, because I really felt, before my mother died, I really felt big and important and loved, and I still do now, but then all the turmoil you go through. And I used shoes as the symbols because I feel that we as women change our shoes with our roles. We have more of a variety of shoes than men do. So we have the hiking boots and the high heels and all of that. So I used that. And the black at the top is a shroud. Then for my Bachelor of Fine Arts final exhibition, I did a series of closets. When I was a kid, my room was always a mess. And then when a friend would come over, I'd throw everything in the closet. And that's teenagers. And then when I'd clean out my closet, I would feel like I could conquer the world. Everything was just open. And so I like that as a metaphor of cleaning out the closet. And it was the same, if at that age, I'd bounce a check or I'd do something. I'd tell somebody I would do something and I hadn't done it. Then when I would do it, then I would feel the same way that I did with cleaning out my closet. So I did this series of closets. And this is the year I finished my BFA. This one on this screen is more three-dimensional than the first one. And this is just full of cliches. There's excess baggage and dirty laundry. There's a skeleton. You can see the little skeleton figure up here. And I wanted to, I was using the organs. You can see up here, these are like intestines and a heart. And at that point I didn't know what a heart looked like. So I made arrangements, and with Mary Jane Edwards was my professor, and she helped me to be able to go over and draw from the cadavers in the anatomy lab. So I would go over there and glove up, and they would hand me a bag of the organs for me to draw from, which was a really interesting process. So I'm still really intrigued by the viscera, and the things that are inside of us, that whatever we do to our bodies, whether we smoke or we eat the wrong food or we live in the wrong place, we don't see it. And yet it's happening inside of us. And these are some of the most common things in the world. So it was interesting to me to see too. And there were 3 cadavers in the lab when I was working there. All 3 of them had black lungs, and not one of them had been a smoker, but they all lived in Denver. And I was told that that was the equivalent at that time of smoking a pack a day if you lived in a big city like that. And Mexico City, which is the most polluted, is the equivalent of smoking 3 packs a day.
Whoa.
So I was doing printmaking and ceramics at the time, and was torn between the two, because I love the handmade paper, and as you can see here, those edges are similar to the way I work with clay. And then after I finished at Wyoming, I went to Southern Illinois at Carbondale for my Master of Fine Arts. I had decided I wanted to teach at the college level, and I started making these faucets. And one of the things that is just at my core is a need for a challenge. Fortunately, Richard is so supportive of that. Whenever I come home and say they want me to do this, whatever, he always says, "Who better than you?" Well, that just makes you feel 10 feet tall. And I always say that we all need someone who thinks we hung the moon, and then we have to give it back to them. So I hope I do that for him, bless his heart. But so I bought a frozen salmon, and made a mold of it. And so I have the salmon swimming upstream just as a symbol of challenge. And then we ate the salmon, by the way. It was expensive. But then somebody took this, and I care about our environment, but somebody took this as an environmental piece because of the industrial look of the faucet, as if this was pollution that was working on the salmon. So it really taught me that every decision that the artist makes has to support that thesis, or it doesn't work. It says something other than what we want it to say. So I started working more abstractly. And one thing that I loved about working like this was, and working large, was that with clay, it can't support itself until it's fired. So there's a discovery process all along the way. Once I put the pieces together, this water was in 3 pieces. There's one split there, one here, and then it fed into here. So until it was fired, I couldn't tell what it was really going to look like. And so I enjoyed that sense of discovery all along the way. Then my professor says, you know how to make things stand up, get off the wall. So I did. And this is when I really started letting the clay have its way with me. So I just let it collapse as I was building with it on the right side here. And again, I never saw it until it was completed. And then I saw this negative space, and it makes me think of Rodin's Balzac, the sculpture. So what survived of this was my love of paper and my love of working with the material as a conversation. And it really became more about the material and the form. And I'm a person who loves those intimate spaces. Remember how as children, we like to climb into a box or put a sheet over a card table and climb in it. Those little intimate spaces are just intriguing to me. So that worked into my sculpture. And I would often stop and jump a fence and photograph a haystack. I love haystacks. And I love the way I judge a rancher by his or her haystack, because some of them are tumbled down, and some of them are just as neat as a pin. So for my thesis exhibition, I had some tall pieces, and this one happened to fit right into concrete. So it's kind of about the way the pieces fit together. Then Richard had a job in Colorado, and I didn't have a job yet. So I was working there and teaching a course at a local community college. And then I got a call from my former professor at grad school saying they need someone in Kansas at Emporia State to fill in while they do a search. And so I called and faxed my resume. I interviewed with 5 male voices on the phone on a Friday. I got the call on Thursday. I interviewed on Friday. On Sunday, I left with a little trailer full of furniture, enough for 1-bedroom apartment, pulling it with my 1996 Cougar, and headed over the mountains to fill in for this semester. And then I was offered the job. So Richard had committed 5 years. So we commuted for 5 years from Western Colorado to Eastern Kansas. It's about a 12-hour drive. But I would get in the car whenever any vacation, any break from school started, and head for Colorado. And then in 2000, I became department head. So Richard had fulfilled his 5 years to these guys. So he moved to Colorado, and I took the job, or he moved to Emporia, Kansas. So I kept the job, and we were there for about 12 years. But I was still making pots. I call these my dancing cups. They don't have the texture on the inside. So I started increasing the textures on the inside, kind of as a metaphor for the human, that we should be, what you see should be what you get, and that what we see on the inside should be what we are on the outside, or vice versa. And it's interesting because it isn't that my textures or my forms emulate or mimic anything around me, but what clay did was to make me notice nature and notice textures. So this is flying in, we had Bruce, actually, son Bruce has a super cub that's been in the family for a long time. And this was flying in that over a snow-covered land. And this, I really like to weld too. So this is steel and porcelain. And I like that metaphor of the strength of the steel with the seeming fragility of the porcelain, although porcelain is quite strong. And I worked quite large. So this is square tubing. That's a self-portrait with me, my foot on my welder. I say I weld, therefore I am. And then this is my forms changed. And Richard, I accuse him of putting something under my pillow that says work small, because he was the one who ended up schlepping everything. I was able to see that teapot recently. And one summer I received a faculty research grant, and I was able to go to a little foundry up in the mountains in Colorado and make this work. I made molds of the work on the left and then cast it in bronze. I have three different pieces that are done like this. And so the textures are on the inside as well. I was also still doing some two-dimensional work. So on the left is just, I taped off the center, and then I would drizzle gesso on the paper. And then I would just squeegee dry pigment. I would moisten it, but over the top. And again, on the right, this is just noticing the quilt effect of the terrain when you're flying. In 98, I was invited to be in a symposium in Taiwan. At this point, knowing that my parents had died at 41 and 47, and I was 49 when I finished my MFA. So at this point, I'm older than my parents were when they died. And I'm thinking, I want to take care of myself, but I don't know how long I'm going to last. I don't know how much of this is hereditary. So I was saying yes to everything. And fortunately, as I said, Richard was always so supportive of that. So I would do something every year. And right now I'm in Helena working for the Archie Bray Foundation to write these essays. So it's coming back to Helena, where I was a summer resident in 99. And I challenged myself to make 100 tiles and never repeat a texture. So those are some of them up in the right-hand corner. Then in 2000, I went to Denmark for a 1-month residency in Skalskjør. The top word there looks like Guldegard. It's Guliagol. Sure. They say you have to put mashed potatoes in your mouth to speak Danish. So Guliagol in Skalskjør for a month. And then in 2001, I was invited to be a part of this symposium in Faenza, where we went to the factories and saw them making this, decorating these plates. This woman has on high heels. Most of them did, which is interesting. So we went to another factory and bought the bisqueware plates. And then we went to this Ceramics Institute. And these are 3 plates that I painted while we were there. We did this in one day. I mean, the painting we did in one day. And then in 2002, I went to Foshan, China as a part of, there were 25 artists internationally who went, and we worked in a ceramics factory. And then this piece, we had to leave a piece. So this piece is in their collection. And then there's a gap there because I was president of the national, it's called the National Council on Education for the Ceramic Arts. And I was president of that for 2 years and still teaching, or I was chair actually and teaching. So I didn't get much work done between 2002 and 2005. But in 2005, when I was no longer president, I went to the pottery workshop in Jingdezhen, China, which is my favorite city in China. And I made these figures. I wanted to do women, but when I would photograph them on the street, they would giggle or do something goofy. So I went and learned to do Tai Chi and photographed the Tai Chi, the women doing Tai Chi. So this sculpture is of this woman. She was my favorite. We became really we were attracted to each other. We just became friends, but neither of us spoke the other's language. And I made these garments. If you've been to my studio, you've seen these figures. But they made this punch for me so I could cut and punch these tiles that became their garments. And then I had boxes made to transport them. And the crate, one of the crates coming across the street there is a 1 cubic meter crate that I shipped home. And here are the 3 figures that I made. They each have 2 female feet and 2 male lion feet, because I believe in a balance of masculine, feminine characteristics in us all. Then I was invited, I received this box in the mail that had these, there was clay and 2 of these gnomes, and we were supposed to decorate them in our own style and then send them back. So these 2 gnomes went back to Germany, and what they're in a museum collection there. I think one is in a traveling exhibition. And then I was invited to make work in China. I was there for a month to make work for the American Ceramics Museum. There are 9 museums on this site, all dedicated to ceramics in a different region of the United States. And here's what I made while I was there. You can see how big that is. They were loading the kiln, unloading it there, I think. And I made those 2 pieces that are in their collection. And then we had access, it was a roof tile company, so we had access to their molds. So I cut their molds up and gave the terracotta warrior some bound feet. And I gave the lion some of the terracotta warriors boots. So they're all mixed up, and I made 10 of these figures. I still wear, I went back to this hairdo. See that? This was, what year was it? 2008, did I say? Anyway, yeah, so those are the 10. And I thought they might be really offended, but the factory owner kept coming through with his thumb up and saying how, which is good. And then these are 4 of the 5 Kiwis I met in China, and they made me an honorary Kiwi and wanted me to come and show with them in Christchurch. So, but I had to come if I was going to send work. So that was my first trip to New Zealand, and these wonderful Kiwis, still in touch with them. And then I was asked to take over these 2 international ceramics magazines that had been started in Australia. She was in her 70s and wanted to get out of it. So she said to me, who better than you? Everywhere I go in the world, there you are. So I took these over and left academia and we moved back to Sheridan, which was great. So I love the language. I love our language. And I'm always yelling at the TV or at, when they abuse it. And so here we are back in Wyoming. And this is where we live. Some of you have been there. Since you've been there, though, we added the gazebo, and my studio is now an Airbnb, but it couldn't be a nicer spot of heaven. And this is my studio wall.
Which is part of the Airbnb.
Part of the Airbnb, yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is worth it, even if you live here, just to go rent it, because
Yeah.
then you get
Yeah.
Margaret,
been-
I think you and I, Margaret, need to go out and have a girls' night there.
Yes, that
There
sounds like a
you
good
go.
idea.
There you go. I should have put more pictures in it. There's a wonderful bedroom upstairs and a great bathroom downstairs. It's really a nice space. And whenever we feel a little down, we just go read our guest book because the people just love it. And we've made such good friends just with our guests. So it's been really fun.
Oh.
Just another piece.
So
I
Elaine,
think-
can I stop
Yeah.
you here? So just, and this may be a silly question, but so are you, for example, that middle part, which is exquisite, are you making the piece and then cutting the clay, or are you making the piece and then building onto the clay? I mean, building on with clay, like layers.
Yeah. The bottom part is thrown on the wheel. And
Okay.
sometimes I alter that, and as you'll see. And then you've done coiling.
Mhm.
So I just build up like that. I start on that bottom thrown part, and I start with the thin layers, and then I just keep building up. So, and then forming as I go. But I love the freshness of untouched clay and what it does when a tool cuts it. So again, it's like a conversation. It's like I make a mark with the tool and the clay responds, and I have to pay attention to what it says in order to maximize the material. So
It's like you pulled that from, like, the kingdom of Zeus, or up from Poseidon, I mean, it's just like you just pulled it from a god. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Well, I can tell you what
it's very organic.
it
Yes.
is. Yeah, it is organic. And but I can tell you, like this, can you see my cursor?
I can.
Mhm.
Okay, that is from a Scandinavian rolling pin that has grooves.
Oh,
This right down here is from going to Home Depot and buying a small spring and pulling the spring so that it's no longer functional, and then cutting the clay with that by just moving it back and forth. This texture
That, yes.
is, and this here is just pounding. I bought a brass wire brush, like it looks like a toothbrush, but it's brass, from an automotive store. And I pound the clay, and then I might, like in this case right here, press it from the inside so that it almost looks like cauliflower when it's done. And then this one is a rolling pin with larger grooves in it. And then I've gone over those grooves with another tool. So some of them are more than one tool. And there are a lot of the textures that are in between here that I use a wooden wallpaper roller. If you've ever hung wallpaper, you roll the seam. And they used to make those out of wood. And now I think that the rollers are all plastic, which sticks to the clay. But I make these little thin areas with that. But I toss the clay out a lot, and I tear it. And sometimes the texture I'm going after isn't as good as what happens when I tear the clay. So I end up, that's where I have to be paying attention, or I don't get it, Here's another one that where you can see that I threw the bottom and then altered it. I cut into it for these here, and it's flattened front to back, and then the foot is cut.
Lovely.
Thank you. And the insides then also are similar. And this is a black clay called Cassius clay, if you can believe it. And this was altered later with, I put black flowers in it. But I love that clay, and it's electric kiln. These are just some cups that I make. I haven't made these for a while, but, and then I, once we moved back here, I didn't have the pressure of having to be in exhibitions like you do when you're in academia. So I've always wanted to be a functional potter, and I'm not a good one, but I started making bowls. And then I started this bowl project. I made 50 bowls, and I actually made more than that, but they're all the same clay and all the same glaze. And I shipped one to a wood firer in each of the states. And I wanted to see how they came out, and they all came out different, even just because of the way in which they were fired.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's the
Really
same.
amazing. So it's a type of wood they use, I suppose, and the temperatures that make the difference.
It's that, the amount of reduction, where they choke down the flame to get, yeah, to get a different effect. So Allison Palmer on the left here is in Connecticut. Her husband is Steve Katz, who was a founding member of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He still plays with them. The old, but I love this contrast, you know, the one on, you wouldn't say that those were the same glaze at all. And here are two more. The one on the left here, he fires for about 5 days, 24/7. So he has a crew to fire with him. And the woman on the right has a different kind of kiln, and she fires only about 20 hours with very little reduction.
Interesting. What part of Florida is the Lambert in?
He was, I think, probably fairly close to, like, north and west of Miami and Fort Lauderdale. But he has since moved to Colorado and rebuilt his kiln. So he's no longer in Florida. And then Hawaii, this is the only one that came out pond scum green. And people have commented who know the work of these people about how much the firing made the work look like their work.
Oh, yeah.
So when I've shown it, I did have a show at the Nicolason last year. And this is the way they show it. It takes 50 feet of shelving, and then they put the firing description up above it, which is a nice way to do it.
That's cool.
And in 2018, I got to go to Australia again, and I was a visiting artist there with all of these wonderful people from around the world, which was really a privilege. And the pot on the left here I made at the Archie Bray in 1999, and it's one that I've never been able to get rid of. I just keep looking at it. So I've started revisiting that form and have made some of different sizes since then. And then a lot of my travels have taken me to Europe. And when I was in Oxford, England, one time I went to the Ashmolean Art Museum, and there was I actually communicated with them to see if I could get a picture of it, but I haven't been able to. I saw a little porcelain cup with a leather carrying case. It was called a traveling cup. And I thought, well, we do. And in China, they do the same thing. And I did the same thing with the figures that I made. And so I thought, well, we need sculpture to travel with too. So I started making boxes for my pieces. And Ryan King gave me the leather for the piece on the left, and then I dyed the leather for the one on the right. And these just zip up, they're hand stitched.
Did you do the stitching?
I did
Did you-
all of it. Yeah, I did
Oh.
all the, yeah, yeah. I actually learned how to do the the molding. I made a mold from wood, and then just watched YouTube to figure out how to mold the leather.
And put the zipper in?
Yeah, I
That-
put the zipper in. That's all stitched in.
Wow.
But I bought a Berry King punch, and I could
Oh.
punch the holes, so it would be evenly spaced. And then that stitch, it's like a blanket stitch, and it captured the zipper as well as the edging.
Okay.
And I've made some where I make a wooden box and then embellish that. And I love working with leather, and I've been a bookmaker for a long time too. So one of the things that I like about this piece that's open on the right is it shows I make a form that fits the piece. And then I lay the leather over the top of the form and press the piece in. And it's much the way I work with clay. So when that piece gets pressed in, however the leather reacts is the way it stays. And I love soft leathers. So there's a wonderful Montana leather up in Billings. It's about a block large. It's huge. Another
Oh, I
box.
love that.
That's
Thank
gorgeous.
you. Thank you. So then just this year, I was invited back to Emporia State as a visiting artist. And I made this piece it's obviously not as refined as a lot of what I do, but in the amount of time you have, you can't do that. But then I started this new little form that I really am interested in pursuing, the one down here on the right. I really love that form. So that's my next project. So I started out telling you a work of art is a thesis, and every decision that the artist makes supports her thesis. And then, this year I'm the Bray critic. So in order to discover the thesis of the artist, it's the job of the critic to interpret the visual language used by the artist. And then this is a statement from my thesis from last year. I finished an MA in English at the University of Wyoming in May of 2020. And this was my thesis statement. And now I'm just going to show you some things that I like and believe in. Potters trade cups. So when you come to my house, you have to choose the cup you're going to drink from. And the texture thing permeates my food, my CDs. I listen to Tom Waits and Marlene Dietrich and Billie Holiday and Edith Piaf. And, they're all voices with texture. It permeates my life, that love of texture. Richard leaves the lid up, and I put the lid down. This was in our old house in Emporia, Kansas. And when we first got together, which is now almost 33 years ago, we made the conscious decision that we weren't going to argue over little things like this, that when I went into the bathroom, if the lid was up, it was evidence that Richard was the last one there. So, and vice versa. So we switched it in our minds rather than being an aggravation. It was evidence of the other's presence and something that we would miss if that person were gone. And that if we both did everything alike, there wouldn't be that evidence of the other's presence. So it became an important difference to us. But we agree on the important things, which way the toilet paper should go. Yeah, you were supposed to laugh at that. Anyway, and I believe in questioning everything.
Love it. Love that.
We never know everything there is to know about somebody. Isn't that great?
Mm.
Yeah, good old Ronald Reagan, huh?
I thought I recognized him.
In his whitey tighties.
Mm.
And I have grown up believing in my heritage and feeling that connection. When I go to Iceland, they call me a Western Icelander. They don't call me an Icelandic American. Three of my grandparents were from there, and one was Norwegian. And this was a visit that Richard and I and two friends from Ireland took. This is my cousin in Reykjavik on the right. And then one of the places where a great grandparent, there was the old homestead. Now it's a contemporary farm having nothing to do with it. But farms and buildings in Iceland, there's a law that they have to be named, and that name stays with them. And the name reflects the terrain or something about the area. It's generally not a family's name. And I believe that the questions are important. This goes back to that need for challenge that I have. I think I've gone, we're at an hour, but because I love to do things that I don't know how to do. And then I love the process of making it a smooth operation. And
your new piece, Elaine, reminded me a bit, I don't have it memorized, but of that piece that Picasso's working on, or whoever is that, who was the
that's
potter?
Picasso. That's Picasso.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
it is. That's
it's
interesting.
It's just a little bit.
Little bit. Yeah.
Little
I
bit, but
didn't make that connection at all. That's interesting. Huh. Well, he's a good one to emulate.
Well, I mean,
And then I always feel like everybody else does, like we're ducks floating along on the water and paddling like hell underneath. And that's it.
Yay.
Very good, Elaine. That was very interesting.
Are there questions?
Margaret, would you like to put your camera on before we continue? I can stop the recording. Is that okay
Sure.
if we stop the recording?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know.